The other category of server-side controls in ASP.NET is the web controls category. And these are all controls that are defined in the system.web.ui.webcontrols namespace. And these are an alternative to using these server-side HTML controls, and you're really pushed towards using these controls. You'll find that most ASP.NET developers use these controls over their HTML counterparts. And the HTML counterparts are usually only used when you already have existing markup that you're trying to manipulate on the server. And one of the reasons is you'll find these controls listed as the standard controls at the top of your toolbox. So this will tend to be the first place you go to start laying out your pages. That's where you grab your text boxes and your buttons and your links, etc. And one of the reasons that these are a bit more convenient to work with is that they have more consistent property names. So unlike the HTML controls, which reflect the idiosyncratic nature of the property names in HTML, these are named consistently across the entire suite of controls. So if you want to set the text in a button control, it's just going to be the .text property. Same thing in the label. If you want to set the text in a label control, it's just the .text property. If you want to set the corresponding CSS class in any of these controls, it's going to be the CSS class property. So once you know how to use one control, you know how to use a lot of the same features in all of the other controls as well. And that's not quite the same as the HTML. For example, in HTML, if you were setting the text of a span element, you would need to use the inner text or inner HTML property. And if you were trying to set the text of a button or an input element, you would need to set the value property. So you have to be aware of the HTML property names as you work with those controls. And a lot of these web controls are simply replacements for HTML. So you'll notice many of them they only render as a single HTML element. So the button will render as an input, the label renders as a span, text box renders also as an input with the type set to text, hyperlink renders as an anchor tag, etc. So many of these are simple replacements for HTML. Others, however, are more complex, more compound renderings. So for example, the calendar control, there's no client-side HTML element called a calendar. So instead what they do is they give you this calendar control here, but when it renders, it actually renders as a table with a bunch of cells that are written with the days of the month in them and the header with the entire name of the month at the top, etc. Similarly, the XML control is one that takes an XML document and an XSLT file and renders by applying the transform of the XSLT to the XML document. So there's a variety of controls, some of which are simple mappings onto HTML elements, others of which are more compound, more interesting implementations, more complex. So let's take a look at web controls here in our demo. Now we actually used quite a few web controls in the preceding module just to acquaint everyone with the fundamentals. So the bulleted list is an example of a web control that renders a standard ordered or unordered list. The panel is an element that renders as a server-side div. Label is an element that renders as a span. Button is an element that renders as an input element type equals button. So what we could do here, let's sort of finish cleaning up our page, is get rid of this response.write. And let's replace it with a label. Let's just use a standard label. In fact, I'm going to drop that panel out of there too. So here's a label. I'm going to set the ID of the label equal to item count label, since that's what it's going to display. And I can set the text through the text property here, or you can also set it as the inner content for the control. So there are a total of items, and we'll just print that dynamically on the server. And then let's also do something like changing the font. So font size, maybe we can set it to large to get it closer to what it was before. And now I should have a control on the server named item count label of type label, which we know renders as a span, and I should be able to modify its content. So let's go ahead and set the item count label dot text. Okay, so again, even though it renders as a span, the server-side property for the text is simply text. And we'll set this equal to whatever we used to be writing out via response.write. So that was total number of items, and we called item count to string, and I no longer need to terminate it because I'm setting the text internally. Okay, so that should set the label text exactly like it was before, except now it's going to be rendered as a span with a font size style attribute as part of its rendering. So let's go ahead and try running that. Okay, so there's my total number of items down here, equals 10, looks good. And just as another quick example of a compound web control, let's try putting a calendar on here. And notice when I run the calendar, and you see the entire rendering down below, let's go take a look at the source code. You'll notice that the rendering of the calendar is obviously not just a simple HTML element, right? It's this moderately complex collection of HTML elements encapsulated by a table with a bunch of rows and columns inside of it. So that's how you work with web controls. Tend to be a bit more intuitive and consistent naming conventions, and usually are where you go first to start building your ASP.NET pages.